Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business owning families. This conversation today represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship from the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to Jay Hughes and his foundation. On the last Authors at Drucker, we featured a book called The 10 by 10 Learning Roadmap, Advancing Flourishing in Families of Wealth. If you missed it, please feel free to check out the recording on our YouTube page or on our website. Before we begin, I wanted to mention two other initiatives that I'm really excited about at the Drucker School. Let me share my screen real quick. The first one is our certificate in advising family enterprises. We are partnering with institutions to facilitate this training really at the intersection of the financial and non-financial challenges that business owning families face. If you're interested in learning more about this, please reach out to me and I'll tell you more about it. The second is our Generational Wealth Masterclass. Jay Hughes and I recorded this content, and we are just beginning to use it. We've used it in Uganda. We're planning on using it in Brazil, on a couple of other trips and collaborations that are in the works. So if you want to learn more about the Generational Wealth Masterclass content, again, feel free to reach out to me. Let's get to today's guest. Today's guest on Authors at Drucker is Professor Ellen Langer. Ellen Langer earned her PhD at Yale University in social and clinical psychology and joined the faculty at Harvard in 1977. She is considered the mother of mindfulness and has written 5 books on the topic, starting with her bestseller, Mindfulness, and her newest book, The Mindful Body, Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. The Langer Lab conducts research on health, happiness, decision-making, education, business, and culture, all through the lens of mindfulness. Ellen, welcome to Authors at Drucker, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
So, Ellen, our audience is at Authors at Drucker is mostly individuals from multi-generational family companies and the advisors that serve them. So I'm going to do my best to serve that specific audience with our conversation today. And perhaps to start us off, you can give us an explanation of what mindlessness is, and then perhaps you can define mindfulness for us.
Okay. Well, let me do it in the reverse order.
Okay.
Right. And the reason for that is that when people hear the word mindfulness, they tend to think of meditation. And meditation is fine. I actually did some early research on meditation, but this is a very different thing. When you meditate, it's a practice. It takes you out of the world. You sit for 20 minutes, repeating your mantra with the expectation that that will lead to post-meditative mindfulness. So meditation itself isn't mindful. Mindfulness, as we study it, is immediate. It's not a practice. It's a way of being. It's very simple. You just notice new things about the things you thought you knew. You come to see you didn't know them as well as you thought you did, and your attention naturally goes to them. Now, there are basically 2 ways of becoming mindful in this manner. One is bottom up, as I just said, notice new things. The other is top down, which is once you recognize that everything is always changing, everything looks different from different perspective, you recognize that uncertainty is the rule, not the exception. So if you know you don't know, then you naturally tune in. So if you came to visit me, you've never been to my house, you wouldn't have to practice anything. What you would do is walk in, oh, what is it? Did she do that painting? What is that over there? Oh, look what she's reading, and so on. And it turns out that this active noticing is literally and figuratively enlivening. So we've done lots of studies where we give people experience with active noticing and they actually live longer. It improves everything. Now, mindlessness, the other side of this, is where people are more or less like robots. But the interesting thing, Dave, is that we're oblivious to when we're mindless. When you're not there to know you're not there. 45 years of research, sadly, has told me that virtually all of us are not there almost all the time. All right. And since I've been studying this for so long, we've had lots of opportunity to see what changes when people become mindful, and it affects virtually everything. And my belief and 45 years of hard data tells me that this is a gigantic statement I'm going to make, but still I'm making it. All of our problems, whether personal, interpersonal, professional, or global, are the direct or indirect result of our mindlessness. Right?
That's a big
And
statement.
yeah, now if you think about it, so I often do. Well, let me just do it. One of the things that everybody thinks they know, right? This is the simplest of all. So, Dave, how much is 1 + 1?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's two.
Yeah, okay, but no, you say, and so much so that you'd probably, if we weren't interviewing me now, laugh at me, disparage me in some way, and walk away. But it turns out that this fact, the one everybody knows, is not always true. If you were to add 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 + 1 is 1. If you were to add 1 cloud plus 1 cloud, 1 + 1 is 1. One pile of laundry plus 1 pile of laundry. So in the real world, it doesn't equal 2 as or more often as it does. And someone sent me a fun one the other day. So if you take a pizza and you put another pizza on top of it, you have 2 pizzas. 1 pizza plus 1 pizza is 2. However, if you take a lasagna and you put a lasagna on top of it, 1 + 1 is 1. It's just a bigger lasagna. All
I like
right.
where you're going. I love
Okay.
lasagna.
Well, all right. Well, so now let's imagine somebody comes over to you and says, it's unlikely, but Dave, how much is 1 + 1? All of a sudden you have choices. When you're mindless, you don't have any choice. You're responding like a robot, right? Now you say to yourself, you can, say 1, 2, and if you are mathematically sophisticated, 1 + 1 is 2, only if you're using a base 10 number system. If you're using a base 2 number system, 1 + 1 is written as 10. So you have a lot of choices, and you'd pay some attention to the context to see which of these alternative answers to give. The
So
world opens up to us in ways that we currently are just oblivious.
that's beautiful. I love it. So is there any connection to mindfulness or mindlessness as a kind of development? Because it seems like children oftentimes are kind of lost in their surroundings. They're interested in become very interested in little things. I could be taking my little one on a walk and she might
Yeah.
find a,
No,
a
I think,
leaf that's really interesting
yeah,
to her.
I
But do
think
we just
that
lose that
kids,
over time or what happens?
yes, it's not, we don't accidentally lose it. It's beaten out of us, I think.
Okay.
Parents, schools are constantly giving us facts. 1 and 1 is 2. Everything is as if it's known, and that leads people to believe that they're supposed to know, and the person they're talking to seems to know. So then they pretend, or they avoid the situation in the first place. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
It's a very different way of operating on the world. What it does is open up, oddly, all sorts of possibilities. So I was at a horse event many years ago. And remember, I'm an A++ student, the one everybody resented because I always knew the answer, right? This man asked me, will I watch his horse for him because he's going to get his horse a hot dog? Well, no one knows better, as well, possibly, but not better than I. Horses are herbivorous, they don't eat meat. He came back with the hot dog and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong. But for me, that wasn't scary. That meant all sorts of things that people think can't be may actually be possible. And that's been the core of my research over 45 years, to show that very small things might have very large effects for good.
One of the ways you describe mindlessness in the book is a single explanation for an event, which I really love. And so on
Yeah.
the flip side of that, then mindfulness seems to open up all sorts of paths to empathy and compassion. And
Yeah.
in
Well,
this, go ahead.
and generally, that, I mean, just let's go back to school. You're in elementary school, you're with your daughter or whomever. You're not there, but she's there.
Mhm.
And the teacher asks, how much is 1 + 1? And she says 1. because she heard our podcast, right? Now, what is the teacher likely to do? In most cases, she's going to not only tell her she's wrong, but give her some look that's going to have all the class look at her as if she's stupid.
Mhm.
Where, in fact, if the teacher were more mindful and recognized that questions have potentially many, many answers to them, and she'd say, well, how did you come to that? And then she would have taught everybody that if you add 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 plus 1 can be 1. Yeah, so we're taught to be mindless. Little kids, now I don't know, infants. I don't know
Yeah.
what their minds are like, but certainly once they're toddlers, and we spend so much money on gifts and things for these kids, toys, and you give them a cardboard box and they'll be happy for hours. So yes, I agree with your intuition.
I know what you're saying because I have one of those big cardboard boxes in my living room right now from a
Yeah,
purchase, and that's
okay.
all my little girl wants to play in. So I totally get it. Specific to family businesses, again, we have many advisors that will listen to this interview. There are some mindless judgments that seem to happen with multi-generational family companies. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is the assumption that children of financially successful families will be spoiled and entitled and
Mhm.
somehow, not turn out. Another one might be the third generation loses the family business. These are things that they've been told. So as you think about the advisor to such a family, what advice would you have for them in terms of suspending their judgment and becoming more mindful?
Okay, well, there's so much that, I can just give you a snippet and people can read Mindful Body and get the rest of it. But okay, so, as I mentioned, I've been doing this research for 45 years and I have stunning findings. Hopefully, we can talk about some of them. The one thing I came to uh, that was more important to me than making people live longer and happier and so on was the realization that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. Nobody
Hmm.
wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be obnoxious, clumsy, and mean. All right. So when we're disparaging people, always what we're doing is mindlessly judging them from their perspective. So let me give examples to make this clearer. You get on my nerves, Dave. I barely know you, but it's clear to me you are so inconsistent. Well, from your perspective, what you're being is flexible. And you can't tolerate me because I am so gullible, which I am, but that's because I'm trusting. Now, what happens is, let's say you're trying to persuade me. You say, Ellen, look at that. You were taken actually by two psychopaths, which is real. It's cost me a lot of money being gullible. So I keep trying to change. I'm never going to be able to change because going forward, I'm not being gullible. I'm being trusting. Now, if you want me to stop being gullible, what you have to do is get me to stop valuing being trusting. We did a study a long time ago. We gave people, I don't remember if it was 200 or 300 of these behavior descriptions. So impulsive, gullible, inconsistent, so on. And people were told, check those things that you keep trying to change about yourself, but you're unable to do so. Okay, so for me, I'd check impulsive, gullible. I won't tell you the rest. You turn it over, and in a mixed up order are the positive versions of each of these. Now the task is circle those things you really value about yourself. My being trusting and spontaneous. And as long as I value being trusting and spontaneous, I am going to be seen as impulsive and gullible. Right. So you can see how all sorts of relationships change. And this is not just in the workplace, but at home. But if we stay in the workplace and the person who you're demeaning, not realizing because you think they deserve this, they don't know what they're doing. But if actually you were able to understand what they were doing from their perspective, it'd be much easier for you to appreciate them. But also, if you wanted to change their behavior, that would be one way to do it.
This,
Another thing I was thinking of, you know, people, Google, for instance, has a ping pong table, for the workers, their staff or whatever. And that sounds good, right? Because Harvard doesn't have it. Well, they probably have it in gyms, but not in the academic rooms. But if you think about that, what does that actually say? It's saying that the work is unpleasant, so therefore we have to compensate and give you time to enjoy yourself.
Mm.
Now, it turns out that mindfulness is enlivening. It's the essence of engagement. It's what you're doing when you're having fun. And so you don't need, to add these extra things. What you need to do is make the work inherently more interesting. People tend to think there are good things, bad things, boring things, stressful things. Work is hard, and all of that is wrong. These evaluations are in our heads, not in the situation. And so, and the mistake, we get people like me and possibly you, I don't know you well enough, but I love what I do. And it's, my gosh, you work so hard. Not really, because I'm having fun doing it.
Yeah.
But it seems like people want to give me more if they think that I'm working. I can't charge large amounts for talks that I give by saying I love this stuff. So once we realize that being mindful is energizing, it's energy begetting, not consuming, that if we make our workforce more mindful, we're going to improve their performance. By mindfulness, I've got, again, 45 years of research, improves their health. So there'll be fewer sick days, absentees, and so on, all around. And also the products they produce will be better. And I have data, measuring each of those.
Well, I think this work is a game changer for me as a parent. It's gonna take practice, but seeing my kids through a mindful lens and some of the choices they make will be helpful. I want to talk now about risk takers. Business owners are typically categorized as risk takers. You talk about the myth of risk taking in your book. Can you tell us a little bit more about the myth of risk taking and the
Okay.
arbitrariness of interpreting risk?
Yeah. Well, um, what people tend to do in many ways is conflate the actor and observer perspective, and that's why you saw me as gullible, without me seeing myself as gullible until you pointed out, and so on. Now, once we recognize that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else they wouldn't do it. Nobody takes risks. Now, if I'm driving and you're sitting next to me and I make a turn at 70 miles an hour, and oh my God, and you're scared to death, and you think, if I do it, but you wouldn't do it, therefore I must be a risk taker. But in my mind, I'm a good driver. So, whether I should or shouldn't take it at 70 miles is irrelevant. I don't do it saying, oh, what the hell, I could get into an accident, kill both of us.
Mhm.
I do it because it makes sense, or else I wouldn't do it. So again, it's a very different perspective. So let's say, um, um, well, you have people, and some that I'm very fond of, who want you to take risks, and they go, "Rah, you can do it, you can do it." That's wrong. So I'm about to dive from a mountain into the small water area of water. I can't dive, or I can dive, but not, and I am scared. I don't want to do it. And come on, Ellen, you can do it. And you offer me lots of, all of that is trying to get me to take the risk.
Yeah.
Now, if you had Mark Spitz, he would just dive into the water.
Yeah.
Let's turn it around now. Let's say there's a very big prize or a very big cost for taking some psychology test. Mark, you can do it. You can do it. Well, he doesn't know any psychology, probably. So he probably can't do it. Where I wouldn't have to be coaxed, I can just do it. So, what is the point? The point is, if you want me to dive into that small pond, make me a better diver. If you want Mark Spitz to take the psychology test, teach him psychology. All right. And that all follows naturally when you realize that people are doing what makes sense to them, and then we often hide that. So nobody buys a stock and saying at the moment they buy it, boy, I'm going to lose this $10,000 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
right? They buy it because they think it's going to go up. They know that if they sound certain about that, other people are going to think they're delusional because there's no way, of knowing. But at the moment we're doing something, it's because it'll be effective. If I do it and you wouldn't do it, you see me as a risk taker.
So one question, I feel like we use a lot of mindless phrases.
Yes,
So one
almost
one
always.
might be when our kids are walking out the door, be safe, or look both ways when
Yeah,
you cross the street, or when someone's leaving for a trip, safe travels, as if we're gonna try to somehow not
yeah.
be safe
No,
or
but
risk.
no, yeah. No, I don't think that. I think that sometimes the language we use is used not because of its manifest meaning. When you tell me have a nice trip, what you're telling me you care about me. That's all. You're
Okay.
not really giving me instructions about how to be on my vacation. So, so there.
Okay. So a connected principle I feel like you talk about in the book is this illusion of control. In the world of business, we seek to put business continuity plans in place, estate plans in place to try to control or feel like we have control of the future. Would it be healthier for us to accept that there's this illusion of control, and maybe tell us about that?
Yeah, well, when I started the studies, which was back in the 70s, on the illusion of control, I would see people in a casino talking to machines and, slot machines and so on. And so I was very much schooled in seeing people as being irrational. But I've changed all of that thinking, and that again, people's behavior makes sense, or else they wouldn't do it. And we don't know really what things can or can't be controlled. But believing that you have control is the only way to go forward with whatever you're doing. So it's not irrational. All right. But interesting that at the same time, predictability is an illusion. And this is a hard one for people to understand. That people don't realize that the fact that you can predict large numbers and trends doesn't mean you can also predict individual behavior. So let's say we're going to say we have a used car lots in general, and Mercedes lots. Okay. And you're going to place money. Well, surely more Mercedes are likely to start when you turn the key than in the used car lot. However, I'm happy to make you a wager. Let's make it big for $500,000. We have to big borrow still to get it. That we're going to go to a Mercedes dealership, and you can choose any car at random that's outside. If the car starts, I'll give you the $500,000. If it doesn't, you give me the. Now, people aren't going to take the bet because people know even with the best, there are lemons, right? All of us, we take Michael Jordan, occasionally misses the basket. All right. So we can't predict the individual case. And in life, really, that's all we care about most of the time. It's nice if you tell me that this operation is successful 90% of the time. I want to know, is it going to work for me? All right.
Hmm.
But so now, what does this mean about decision making? And this is a little complicated. It's not complicated to be read, but for me to race through it. But essentially, and if you ask me if you want me to go into more detail here, I think that we waste too much time trying to make the right decision, which is based on predictability, right? Because
Yep.
you're predicting that this alternative, and you can't predict. And rather than waste our time trying to make the right decision, what we should do is make the decision right. All
I
right.
love
That
this.
you can't know. When you make a decision, it's in order to take action. As soon as you take that action, you can no longer evaluate, excuse me, what the alternative action would have been like. Should I go to the right or the left? I go to the right. Okay, that doesn't work. It doesn't mean going to the left would have. And now the traffic is different. The time of, everything is different. All right. Moreover, people think they should, and they don't do them but they think they should do cost benefit analyses. People are doing it correctly. It's the experts that I think have it wrong. Once you recognize that things are neither good nor bad, things are only what our minds make them, right? That means that if you were to do a cost benefit analysis and recognize every cost is potentially a benefit, every benefit is potentially a cost, that when you add them up, it's going to be zero and not tell you where to go. Not only that, but when people are making decisions, they think they should gather a lot of information. But when do you stop? And that next piece of information that you didn't take might have been a game changer, and so on.
This is a, I mean, I've been thinking about this one in terms of relationship, and I feel like, so I have kids that are aged from range 22 to 6. So I have 6 kids, and they're all
Wow.
making decisions. And as the older ones, are dating and deciding, who they want to really spend time with. And I think about my own marriage, like, did I make the right decision almost 25 years ago? Well, I made a decision that I thought was the right one, and then as I've kind of thought about this concept of, no, make it the right decision, and I do that, try to do that every day with,
Yeah.
I'm investing in that relationship or whatever. Is that connected?
Yes, that's exactly right. So I told an advanced decision making class I teach, um, don't make a decision this week until we meet again. Don't make any decisions. Flip a coin, come up with some other heuristic, maybe the first thing that comes to mind or the last thing, whatever, and spend the week that way. And they come back, and it was a stress-free week because they weren't trying to make a decision. When people make decisions, they have the sense that the outcome is crucial, and the whole decision-making process becomes enormously stressful. And the decision-making process, as it is currently thought of by most decision theorists, I think, is woefully lacking in a certain sense.
There's
Um,
there's a couple of specific applications with business owners I think that they lose a lot of sleep over. One is, should I put my children in shared ownership together, or who should be the next leader? And
exactly.
if we think
Yeah.
about the lens that you've given us, you're saying do the best you can to make a good choice, but
No,
then when you select a
I'll
lead,
tell you, I'm saying even something more outrageous than that, Dave. I'm saying it doesn't matter. You cannot know. You cannot know who is going to fill the role. I mean, it goes back to what I'm saying about predictability. Let's go back a long time ago, before Obama was elected. Let's go 5 years before that. Who would have thought that he would get the nomination and that he would win? And we can do this with almost everything that happens. There's so many things to point to that we just can't know. So you can take your child that seems to be the sleeper, the one who is least likely, and all of a sudden that person says, I've spent my whole life being a slug. I'm going to go for it. And if in that position might outperform the others. You could take the person who's most successful, who says, I've been doing this for so long, everybody thinks I'm great. I don't want to put it in the effort. We can't know.
yeah.
It's very hard for people to appreciate that. But if they realize everything they didn't get that they wanted, and they see how it worked or didn't work, you know, so a silly example, let's say the internet goes out right now. That seems bad, right? No, I'll go have breakfast. For me, it'll be fine, right? For you, you'll have time. We've said plenty. You'll have to think about, do we want more? Should you ask me for more? And you decide to ask me for more. And what happens, because we're having that second conversation, we become friends. Oh, wow. It's a good thing my internet went out, because that friendship could be valuable to us. And so we just can't know.
I love it.
And it's that illusion of knowing that makes people so stressed, that I've got to do the right thing, as if the right thing can be known. Everything is changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. And it's only our mindlessness, when we're mindless, that we hold things still. Um, and, given that, I mean, there's a French expression, well, I won't speak it in French, but it's everything's the same until it's not. And we just never know when when it's going to change. But we don't have to be scared by not being able to predict when we recognize that events don't cause stress, events don't cause anything. What leads to our response is our view of the event. And we can control our view. And the more mindful we are, the more alternative views we have.
Well, it
So if
seems
you
like
think
a better
something
use of,
terrible is going to happen, obviously you're going to feel, scared, nervous, stressed. If you say to yourself, well, what are 5 reasons this thing might not happen? All of a sudden you're less stressed. If you say, what if it happened? How might that actually be a good thing? Now, and so with this way of being, you can just sit back and enjoy things. You're not pulled one way or the other. You don't have to have this, you don't have to avoid that.
I love it. So, in the book, again, you talk about the importance of treating the mind and body as one. It feels like a lot of people have tried to separate mind and body. Can you talk
Yeah,
about
well,
why mind and body needs to be
okay,
one,
so
or needs
yes.
to be thought about that way?
So for anybody who's listening and brought up in a lifetime where people assume mind-body dualism, which was given to us by Descartes forever ago. Now, mind, body, these are just words. And if you have mind-body dualism, then the question you have to deal with is, how do you get from this fuzzy thing called a thought to something material called the body? And everybody's had experience where your mind affects your body. You're walking down the street and a leaf blows in your face and you don't realize it's a leaf, and your pulse starts to increase and so on, because you're scared until you say, oh, it was just a leaf. So we know that the mind affects the body. But and then I've been talking about mind body unity for decades now. The first success was where people would talk about mind body connection. No, connection. Then you still have to deal with how are they connected, and we don't know. I say mind body, just words. Let's put the two together. If we see it as a single unit, then wherever we put the mind, we're necessarily putting the body. So we have a host of studies that I report in the Mindful Body to test this. Some of them very dramatic, but the original study, the first study to test this, is called the counterclockwise study. Here, what we did was we took a retreat and we retrofitted it to be 20 years earlier. I didn't have the funds for it to be quite a Hollywood set, but it was persuasive. We had men in their 80s live there for a week as if they were their younger selves. That means they spoke about past events as if they were just unfolding, right? So now you're putting your mind back in time. What happens? Well, it turns out that their hearing improved, their vision improved, their strength, their memory, and they look noticeably younger. So that was the first of these. Now we go so many more. Let me just, well, I'll give you the next one because it's kind of surprising. Well, they're all surprising, but I won't be able to tell you of each of them. We take chambermaids and we ask chambermaids, how much exercise are you getting? This, Dave, is so bizarre because all they're doing all day long is exercise, right? Making beds, cleaning. Okay. But they don't think they're getting exercise because they think exercise is what you do after work. And after work, they're just too tired. Okay. So now we divide them, very simple study, into two groups. And we teach one of the groups that their work is exercise. They're told making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, and so on. So now we have two groups. One group that knows their work is exercise, one group that doesn't. Okay. We take many, many measures. They're not eating any differently. One group isn't working harder than the other. Nevertheless, now that they change their minds, the group that sees their work as exercise lost weight. There was a change in body mass index, waist to hip ratio, and their blood pressure came down. Now you have to think about this because this is a test of the nocebo effect. Most people know what a placebo is. You give
Mm-hmm.
somebody nothing, a sugar pill, they think it's something and they heal themselves. The nocebo is the inside out version of that. You give somebody something, but they think it's nothing and it takes away its power. Now, so imagine you go to the doctor and you're given medication and the medication doesn't work. What is the doctor likely to do? possibly increase the dosage of the medication, when in fact, what they need to do is enlist us in our own healthcare. Our effects over our health are enormous, and most of the mind body studies tell us this. Let me go to the last one, although we have so many. Um, we inflict a wound. It's a minor wound because I'm not a sadist. And even if I were, the powers that be wouldn't let me do the study. But my student Peter Ungel and I did this. So we inflict a minor wound, and the person is in front of a clock. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. So for a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, the clock is going half as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's real time. What happens to that wound? Now, most people prior to this study would assume it's going to heal when it heals. Who cares what the stupid clock says? But no, what happens is perceived time, clock time, determines the healing. Right.
Wow.
And this is important to notions of fatigue, which is important for people in business to understand in several different ways. But we have people in a sleep lab. I'm big on clock changing. They wake up, they see the clock, it tells them they got 2 hours more sleep than they got, 2 hours fewer, or the amount of sleep they got. Cognitive physiological responses follow perceived amount of sleep. Fatigue is largely a psychological construct. And that's, and when you recognize the mind and body are one, so we get the mind not to be fatigued, so too will the body not be. So here's a fun little study. It wasn't done by me. Frank Beach did the study back in the 50s. Take a little boy rat and introduce a little girl rat, and they'll copulate. Now the little boy rat, he's fatigued. He can't do anymore, right? He needs timeout. However, if immediately you introduce a new little girl rat, he's ready to go. Right? That timeout is context dependent.
That's so
It's hard
interesting.
for people to recognize this. You have somebody who's word processing all day long. Oh, back, they can't bear it. Then they go home and they play the piano. All right. Same thing, but in a different context. Now, I ask my students, how far is it humanly possible to run? And these are Harvard students. They know a marathon is 26 miles. So they say 30 miles. And it becomes like an auction. Someone else says 35, 40. And then somebody says 50. The whole class groans. Okay. Then I turn on a YouTube about the Tarahumara, which is a tribe in Copper Canyon, Mexico. And they easily run over 200 miles without stopping. And I'm suggesting that the difference between 50 and how many people can run 50 miles, and 200 approximate the difference between what I think we can do and where we start, not knowing
Incredible.
how much happier, healthier, not just how much further we can run.
So we're pretty self-limiting if our mind
Yes,
isn't right.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, I want to pivot a little bit to mindfulness in medicine. And I want to share a brief personal story. I have a son who, when he was 17, he was going in for a routine physical before cross country season, and the doctor said, "Well, your heart rate is very low. What I want to do is put you on an EKG." So they did that, and they noticed that he had a complete AV block of his heart, and so she says, kind of in a intense and a little bit worried voice, if this was your dad, and I was with him, if this was your dad, I'd
He'd
put him
be
in the
dead.
back of an ambulance and take him to the hospital immediately. Uh, Obviously, a 17-year-old kid, it shook him. Can you talk about why language matters so much in
Oh,
terms of being mindful? Because it
yeah.
made a
Well,
huge impact on my
of
son.
course. I mean, all right. So there's so much to say. My ears are very sensitive to language, and I talk a lot in the book about some of these things where I have a lot of respect for my colleagues, but they tend to take something bad and make it better. And I spend a lot of time showing them that there's a better than better way. So, for example, you might tell somebody, young or old, to try. You know, they don't want to do try. Now, trying is better than giving up, but trying unwittingly has built into it an expectation of failure. You don't try to eat an ice cream cone, you just eat it, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we do experiments where we have one group told to try, another group just do it, and the doing outperforms the trying. We have words like hope. Hope, that sounds so good, doesn't it? Well, it's better than being hopeless. But when I go, into the kitchen in the morning for coffee, I don't hope there'll be coffee there, right? Because again, hope has built into it an expectation for failure, and too often our expectations become self-fulfilling. The one that I found, it doesn't, well, it's a language thing, so it doesn't follow exactly the formula you're asking about, but this was interesting to me. I was asked to give a sermon at one of the Harvard churches. Well, I'm Jewish and not religious, and I don't spend any time in churches, but I'm a person who almost always says yes, so I say yes. Okay. So now I have to figure out, what am I going to say? And I have no idea. Nothing, well, forgiveness, that sounds sort of religious-y. So let me think about forgiveness. And then I came up with something that was almost sacrilegious. Okay, if you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad? What are they going to tell you? It's
It's good.
good,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Yeah.
good.
Okay. If you ask 10 people, is blame good or bad? What are they going to tell you?
Bad, Ellen.
Bad,
Bad.
right. Well, wait a second. Before you can forgive, you have to blame. So our forgivers are our blamers. Oh, now do you blame people for good things or bad things? Well, you blame people for bad, but things in and of themselves are neither good nor bad. So what do we have here? We have people who see the world negatively, who blame, um, and then forgive. It doesn't seem to me divine. I think that, so it's better to forgive once you blame, but it's better not to blame in the first place. And if you appreciate that whatever the person did made sense from their perspective, or else they wouldn't have done it, that obviates the necessity for blame. So I then we have in the health world. I went to see a friend who had a very bad case of cancer, and she had just come back from Mass General. I said, Eva, how are you? She said her cancer's in remission. And all of a sudden I thought, wait a second. If I took the exact same test, presumably they'd tell me I don't have cancer. Why is it I don't have it, but you have it in remission rather than cure? So we did
Language.
studies.
Yeah.
People who see themselves as cured become happier and healthier on all the measures we took than people who see themselves in remission. In remission, you have to always worry about it. Is it going to come back? Or is it's there lurking? When you get a cold, and you're over the cold, you see yourself as cured. Not that the cold, is in remission. And then if you
It's
get
hiding in
another
the background,
cold,
getting ready to get you sick
yeah, it's a
again.
different cold. Well, so the point is that some of these words lead us to be stressed, and stress itself is bad for our health. So you have a language we use, tells us a lot. A funny one, as I used to be very close with this person. I remember I was waiting for her. We were going out to dinner, and she said, "Well, first let me take my shower." And I said, no, take my shower. you know. But, so I'm going to have my lunch, my dinner. The people who use a lot of my's, grew up in a very different world with parents and, family members treating them very differently from the person who sees the world as plentiful.
Mm.
So if you listen, people unwittingly often tell us a lot, about themselves that they don't realize.
Yeah. Let me give you a couple more other triggering examples. Pre-diabetic, there's a good one, or
Yeah.
terminal or chronically
No.
ill.
Oh, there's so many of if you say to somebody, which you'll hear people not infrequently do, you're oversensitive. What does that mean? That means there's some objective way the situation deserved a 4 and you gave it an 8. Um, you know, yeah, I think that the more carefully we listen, if we understand, we become free from lots of the mindless notions that the people around us have.
One of the things that you bring up that's connected to some of these words is attention to variability and how to navigate that. Would
Yeah.
you mind
Okay, this
spending a
is,
little time
yeah,
with that?
no, I'm happy to. First of all, attention to variability is just a fancy way of saying being mindful, because being mindful is noticing change, and variability means change. All right. Well, so let me go back a little bit to put this in a context for people. My mother had breast cancer that had metastasized to her pancreas. That was the end game. And then magically, it was gone, and the medical world couldn't explain it. And so I tried to, that spent the next 45 years of my life trying to figure out how to give people that control over their health. Now, uh, I wanted to, placebos are probably our strongest medicine, but you can't give yourself a placebo, because if you give yourself something that you think is nothing, you won't then believe it's something
Yeah.
and then heal. So we came up with this attention to symptom variability as a replacement for placebos. It'll take a minute to get there. So we take people who have like all different diseases. They could even be just stress, depression, whatever it is. Let's say chronic illness. In chronic illnesses, when you diagnose with a chronic illness, you implicitly assume there's nothing that can be done about this. Now, all chronic means is that the medical world hasn't come up with anything. There are many things we can do. First of all, we have lots of evidence just being mindful. The neurons are firing, and that's going to be good for your health. Second, out of other people's labs, is amazing stuff on imagined exercise. Can you imagine that just imagining yourself lifting weights is going to have virtually the same effect as actually lifting weights? Right. And then the most important is this attention to symptom variability. Okay, so you have the disease. The assumption is things are going to stay the same or just get worse. Nothing moves in only one direction. You know, when the stock market is going up, it doesn't go straight up, right? It goes up, goes down a little bit, up, down, and it's considered going up when the ups are greater than the downs. Okay. It's the same thing with everything we do. Nobody's performance is perfect. It's never linear. There are blips. Okay, so that means that there are times you're better. But if you don't expect yourself to be better, you're not going to notice when you're better.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we call people periodically throughout the day, throughout the week, and simply say, so how is the symptom today? Is it better or worse than the last time we spoke? And why? Now, that and why question is crucial, because that initiates a mindful search.
Mm,
And again, that mindfulness itself is good for your health. Right?
beautiful.
And then and I personally believe likely to find a solution if you're looking for one. So let's think about this. You start off, you think there's nothing you can do about your disease. That itself is depressing, makes you helpless, is not good for your health in and of itself. Now there's something you can do. As soon as you see the first time change, say, wow, wait, I'm not in excruciating pain 24/7. So that feels good. Then you ask why now rather than before, and so on, and you become more mindful. And we find over and over again, people come up with solutions. We did this with people who have multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, chronic pain, arthritis, real things. And in each case, we get these symptoms diminishing significantly. Right.
So, so I have a question about there's been a lot of technology innovation around wearables, and Apple Watches and other devices. And I'm wondering, is this really helping an individual
Okay.
be
So,
more mindful, or is it
yeah.
akin to like checking your stock 4 times a day and watching it
Okay.
go up and down and
Yeah.
getting worried about it?
Okay. So it doesn't matter what you do. You can do it either mindfully or mindlessly. So it's not in the activity, it's in what we bring to the activity. You
Got
can
it.
give a lecture mindlessly or mindfully, you can listen mindlessly or mindfully, you can play golf mindfully or mindlessly, and so on. Now, what people need to understand, and this goes this motivated lots of my work once I realized, geez, some horses eat meat. Why do we think horses don't eat meat? Well, science only gives us probabilities.
Mm,
And those probabilities are translated by parents, teachers, journalists, lecturers, and so on as absolutes. So it wasn't some horses under some of these occasions eat this, possibly, we eat this kind of meat. We don't know how much grain it was mixed with, and so on. It's the blanket statement:
yeah,
horses don't eat. It's much more persuasive when you leave out all of the conditional stuff, but
sure.
that leads you to become more mindless. So uh, if people recognize that science only gives us maybes, then when your watch tells you you're about to have a heart attack, because you know you shouldn't then assume you're about to have a heart attack, right?
Yeah,
There's often miscalibration and so on. So if you approach these wearables mindfully and see them as possibilities, ideas, and so on, yes, they can be very helpful.
yeah,
If you take it as absolutely true, no, it's going to cause a lot of problems. It's interesting. I never did this study, although I talked about it at least 25 years ago, the difference between information presented in an analog versus a digital fashion.
mm,
The analog is the watch where you have the 12 numbers and
yeah,
whatever. Digital, it tells you it's 10:30. Okay. Um, and the digital feels like it's real, right? I was sitting with somebody in the car. It was very funny because the car is a Mercedes, and you had the temperature given on the car, the temperature on my iWatch, the temperature on her iWatch, and they were all different.
jeez.
And when you see that, then you recognize we're always talking about an about, not an absolute.
Yeah,
But without that, you tend to take it as too real, and then in some instances, it can be very bad for you. It's even, you're talking about your daughter when she goes to school. If she doesn't do well in something, and she gets a C, or worse, a D or an F. I was going to say a D or an E, but we don't use E's. Why did we leave out E's? All right. Anyway, and she takes that as somehow the word from the heavens, an absolute measure of her ability. Um, it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the
yeah,
teacher who made up the test, if she had another cup of coffee, might have asked different questions, um,
yeah.
and so on. So we have to use information more mindfully, which is to recognize it's more of a suggestion, a guide, than something that should overly determine our behavior.
So I have a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. One I'm really curious about, and it's really about age. So Peter Drucker came to Claremont Graduate University when he was 63 years old,
Mhm.
and he worked until he was 95 when he passed away. From age
Mhm.
63 to age 95 were his most productive years, and it wasn't even close. I have a
Yeah,
couple of other friends that have quote unquote retired, and they are now more productive than they ever
yeah,
were during retirement.
sure.
How is this connected to well, and then there's
Well,
others
no,
that retire and then they have physical decline and
sure,
depression.
sure.
So let's talk about that. I
Well,
think
essentially, that when we're young, and we're taught various ways what life is going to be like when we're old, if we mindlessly buy into it, that's what life will be like. I had this experience. I was young, I was in my 30s, and I was at this very, very meeting. I was in my 30s, but everybody else there was 50s and 60s, the very eminent people in the field. And we were talking about the problem that was going to occur in, I think it was 2020, um, because there were going to be so many people turning gray, okay, the
yeah,
age of America. And while they were talking, I was the only one that was positive about old age. And then I said to myself, well, why is that? I mean, is it just because I'm young, so I don't, haven't gone through what they've gone through? And then I realized my grandmother was very vital. And we became close when I was very young. So not only was she very vital, but the difference, because I was young, I was little, she was even bigger
Yeah.
than she might have been if I were bigger, right? When you're the person 5 feet tall is not as big as if you're 3 feet tall. So, okay.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that for many of them, we old, so a young grandmother and old was young. Um, I should wait until can you hear me?
I think I can still hear you. The video is frozen. I think we can continue though. Can you still hear
Okay.
me?
Um, You can. I'm trying to think where I was going with this. Oh, about old age. So, if you have a positive view of aging, then you don't attribute every time you forget something, people worry, am I becoming, do I have dementia? And I do this with my students. So I teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I'll say to them, what was the last thing I said? These are Harvard kids, smart, right? What's the
Yeah.
last thing I said on Tuesday? Nobody remembers. The very last thing I said.
Yeah.
Um, so when you're young, you're not infrequently forgetful,
Sure.
but you don't worry about it. And so
Yeah.
you can imagine that if you worry about it because you're getting older, then you step back from the world, right? Because you don't want other people to know. And, you change your life. Your life doesn't have to change you. Um, yeah, so our views determine who we'll be as we get older. And as you saw with the counterclockwise study, that even some of our things that are taken as most basic to getting old, our eyesight, our vision, I mean, our hearing,
Mm.
our strength, our memory, that they came back for all of these men. So, if you think it will, it will. If you think it won't, it won't. To
All right.
some extent.
One more question. I think this one's a really good one to end up on. You talk about catching mindfulness. It clearly is
Oh
a
yeah, this is
healthier and more
wild.
fulfilling way to live. What
Yeah.
advice do you have for those of us that not only want to personally be more mindful, but also
Oh,
to help spread the contagion of mindfulness?
yeah. Okay, well, so when they read the book, The Mindful Body, they can see the studies on mindful contagion. And you can just sort of imagine, there are some people you're just drawn to. And those are people who are mindful. We have lots of research that when you become mindful, you become more charismatic. When you're mindful, you're less evaluative, judgmental. So people feel safer being with you and so on. So your relationships improve. So, how do you become more mindful? We'll go back to what I said when we first started, recognizing that we don't know, but you don't have to feel bad about not knowing because nobody knows. So the posture you want to assume, I think, the way to be successful in this world is to be confident but uncertain, right? And that uncertainty then leads you to notice. And as you notice, if then when you're there again, you don't think, oh, now you know for all times, because again, things are always changing. And the more you do this, uh, the more exciting life becomes. When you recognize that when you're having fun, you're being mindful. Anytime you're enjoying, you can't be a robot and enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
And when you recognize you're not a victim of circumstances, that the circumstances, your appreciation and emotional response to circumstances depends on the way you interpret them. The more mindful you are, the more potential interpretations. And what that means is that emotions are choices. So we have here
It's
being
so
mindful
empowering.
is energizing. We can choose how to be in this world. It's important for our health and the essence of our happiness. It seems to me a no-brainer.
Well,
So being
Ellen,
mindful is a
thanks.
no-brainer.
Well, Ellen, thanks for choosing to have this conversation with me. I appreciate it, and I've learned a lot from studying your book and now in visiting with you. So, again, thanks for joining me on Authors at Drucker. And for those that are listening to this, if you haven't already picked up The Mindful Body, make an investment in yourself and your future and in the happiness of those around you by doing a little studying on the mindful body. Ellen, thanks so much.
My pleasure, Dave.